All right, ready to dive in. Today we're exploring masculinity in warfare. We're going to break down some excerpts from Conrad Reicher's Steel Masculinity and see what we can learn.
This should be interesting because it really gets into how perceptions of masculinity have been shaped by history and society, especially when it comes to conflict. It's like looking back to understand where we are now.
I like that analogy. Riker starts by talking about those classic masculine archetypes. The valiant knights and the gallant warriors, the figures we see celebrated for their strength and courage.
Right, but Riker challenges us to look beyond the romanticized versions of these figures. Take Genghis Khan, for example. He's often admired for his military genius and his leadership, but today some people see his actions as toxic masculinity, so why the difference?
It's like our values have changed, and we're reevaluating these historical figures with a new lens.
Exactly, and it ties into how men's roles and expectations have evolved over time.
And speaking of evolving roles,
Oh.
Riker makes a fascinating connection between masculinity and technological innovation in warfare.
He argues that developing advanced weaponry has been a way for men to assert dominance and protect their communities, even going back to the Stone Age with the invention of the bow and arrow,
That's a great example, a simple invention that revolutionized both hunting and warfare.
allowing men to project power from a distance, giving them a tactical advantage.
And this link between technology and masculinity continues throughout history. Gunpowder led to firearms, another leap forward in projecting force.
And then you have the V-2 rockets in World War II, a symbol of German engineering, but also a bold statement of national strength.
And of course, the atomic bomb, the ultimate symbol of power in the 20th century.
Developed by a team of mostly male scientists, it really raises questions about masculine ingenuity, its capacity for both creation and destruction.
Powerful point. Riker connects these advancements to how they shape societies.
They become points of pride, woven into national identities.
But they often come with a high cost, as Adam Tooze's work shows. It's a reminder that the pursuit of power can have devastating consequences.
Right, and Riker doesn't stop there. He dives into the world of propaganda and how it's been used to manipulate our perceptions of masculinity, especially during war.
Propaganda is such a powerful tool. During wartime, it's used to reinforce the image of the strong and fearless soldier.
Right, rallying the troops and shaping public opinion.
He gives a great example. Nazi Germany's Voice of the Desert, a fake British radio station broadcasting from Berlin.
Wow, can you imagine?
That's audacity.
It just shows how propaganda plays on our fears and desires, using those narratives to influence our actions.
And the thing is, this manipulation of the masculine image doesn't just disappear in peacetime.
Exactly. Think about the messages we're bombarded with every day in advertising, movies, even the news. They often reinforce those traditional roles, portraying masculinity as synonymous with power and success.
It sets up this rigid framework that can be hard to break free from.
It puts pressure on men to conform. And those who don't fit the mold face criticism.
So what about the men who don't embody those stereotypical traits?
That's the question Riker asks us to consider. Are they somehow less masculine? He encourages us to challenge those narrow definitions.
It's about recognizing that strength takes many forms, and vulnerability isn't weakness.
Right, it's about embracing the full spectrum of what it means to be a man.
Now, this leads us to another interesting aspect of Riker's work, his exploration of the military-industrial complex and its influence on our views of masculinity.
That term, coined by Eisenhower, describes the relationship between the government, the military, and the defense industry. This complex system often relies on the idea of conflict and the need for protection.
And Riker argues that this complex subtly reinforces traditional gender roles.
Men as protectors, women as those needing protection.
It's a powerful dynamic, even if it's not always obvious.
And it raises questions about who benefits from maintaining these roles and who might be marginalized.
Riker does acknowledge the progress that's been made. More women are breaking those traditional barriers, serving in the military and working in defense industries.
Absolutely, but he also points out that significant obstacles remain. Women still face issues like sexual harassment and the glass ceiling. It's a complex issue.
Definitely. But Riker's analysis pushes us to think critically about how these institutions impact our lives.
He really gets you thinking.
Now, Riker shifts to a topic that's often difficult to talk about: the mental and emotional toll that warfare takes on men.
Yeah, it's a hidden cost of conflict that often gets overlooked.
Exactly. Riker dives into the pressure on soldiers to be resilient, to suppress their emotions, to be tough guys.
And that makes it hard for them to seek help when they need it.
It's like they're trapped in a cycle of silence. afraid to show any weakness.
Riker contrasts historical terms like shell shock with our modern understanding of PTSD,
Hmm.
showing how our awareness of these wounds has evolved.
But the stigma around mental health issues, especially for men in the military, still persists.
It's a shame, but it's true.
He shares a startling statistic. Nearly 20% of war veterans suffer from PTSD.
It's a reminder of the invisible wounds that many carry long after the battles are over.
And Riker goes further, discussing the challenges veterans face when reintegrating into civilian life.
It's like they're fighting a battle on two fronts: the external conflict on the battlefield and the internal struggle to heal.
Riker really emphasizes the importance of destigmatizing mental health issues.
And encouraging men to seek help. It's about shifting perspective, seeing vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness.
This brings us to another fascinating concept, the warrior's code. This set of values is deeply ingrained in military culture and often tied to masculine identity.
The warrior's code emphasizes things like loyalty, honor, courage, even self-sacrifice.
It's about those virtues we often associate with heroes.
But Riker makes us consider the potential downsides. What happens when men adhere too rigidly to this code?
He gives some historical examples to illustrate his point. The Samurai Bushido Code, where honor was prized above all else,
Even life itself.
and the Knight's Code of Chivalry, with its emphasis on protecting the weak and upholding justice.
These codes are often romanticized. But Riker points out that the pressure to live up to them can create immense stress and trauma.
It's like an internal battle, constantly measuring themselves against impossible standards.
And this connects back to our discussion of mental health. It can make it even harder for men to admit they're struggling.
Riker argues that we need to move beyond this narrow view of masculinity.
We need to create space for men to be vulnerable, to seek support without feeling like they're betraying the code.
It's about recognizing that true strength includes vulnerability.
Now, this brings us to the final point for this part of our dive: Riker's perspective on the evolving nature of masculinity in the modern world.
It's a timely and important topic. We're seeing those traditional male roles challenged.
And Riker argues that men need to adapt, to redefine their identities in this changing world,
It's about finding a balance.
embracing strength and vulnerability, resilience and empathy.
It's about recognizing that masculinity isn't about fitting into a box.
It's about being a fully integrated human being.
It's about time we move past those outdated stereotypes and embrace a more inclusive and empowering vision of masculinity,
It's about creating a world where men feel free to be their authentic selves.
without the pressure of conforming to some outdated ideal.
A world where they can express their strength and vulnerability, their leadership and compassion.
A world worth striving for.
Absolutely. Welcome back to our deep dive into steel masculinity. We've been exploring how historical archetypes and technological advancements have shaped our perceptions of what it means to be a man, especially when it comes to warfare.
It's been fascinating so far. And Riker takes us even deeper in this section. He explores how these themes connect to a fundamental aspect of human nature, that drive to survive and compete, what's often called survival of the fittest.
It might seem like a jump from masculinity, but Riker connects the dots brilliantly. He argues that this primal instinct, this drive to protect oneself and one's tribe, has had a profound impact on how we see manhood.
Especially when it comes to conflict.
Exactly. He suggests that this drive isn't just biological. It's a psychological and social force that shaped our values.
For millennia.
Right. He argues that war has acted as a crucible throughout history, a testing ground where strength and courage were essential.
It's a bit of a controversial idea.
It is, but it forces us to confront those darker aspects of our nature and how they've influenced our understanding of masculinity.
It makes you think about how those ancient instincts might still be playing out in the modern world.
Even though we're not facing life or death struggles every day.
Right, it's not like we're constantly fighting for survival.
But those instincts are still there. And Riker connects this idea to the warrior archetype, that image of the strong and resolute fighter.
A classic image.
He suggests that this archetype, while often romanticized, reflects our deep-seated desire for power and control.
It's interesting because this archetype embodies both positive and negative aspects. On one hand, it represents courage and the willingness to protect others, but on the other hand, it can be associated with aggression and dominance.
And that thirst for power can have destructive consequences.
Exactly.
But Riker is clear that he's not advocating for a return to some hyper-masculine ideal. He's simply acknowledging that this drive for power is part of who we are.
It's something we need to understand and manage.
If we want to create a more peaceful world.
It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between the warrior and the peacemaker.
Now, Riker also connects this drive for power to technology.
That's an interesting connection.
He traces it back to the earliest tools of warfare, the bow and arrow, the sword, the spear.
The basic tools for survival.
But he argues that they became more than just tools.
They became symbols of male ingenuity and dominance.
Exactly. Those early tools were extensions of the male body, amplifying their strength and reach.
They became instruments of power, both literally and symbolically.
And Riker argues that this connection has only intensified over time.
With each new technological advancement in warfare,
From gunpowder to the atomic bomb.
reinforcing those traditional masculine roles.
Right. Each invention became a testament to male ingenuity.
And a symbol of masculine power.
It's a fascinating cycle. Technology influencing masculinity, and masculinity driving technological advancement.
It makes you wonder how this dynamic is playing out today, with things like AI and drones.
Riker doesn't go too deep into those modern implications, but he does offer a word of caution. This pursuit of technological superiority can come at a high cost.
He reminds us of the devastating impact of war.
The loss of life, the environmental destruction,
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a good thing.
especially when it comes to warfare.
Speaking of things that aren't always good, Riker dedicates a significant part of his book to propaganda, how it's used to exploit our fears and desires, especially during wartime.
Propaganda is all about controlling the narrative,
Yeah.
shaping how people perceive things.
And ultimately influencing their actions.
Right.
He points out how wartime propaganda often glorifies the soldier, the one who's willing to sacrifice everything for his country.
Reinforcing that warrior archetype.
And those images and stories become ingrained in our culture.
Shaping how we view masculinity and patriotism.
He gives the example of Uncle Sam.
That iconic image urging young men to enlist.
It's become synonymous with wartime propaganda.
And it's had a huge impact on how we view masculinity.
What's interesting is that Riker points out how this manipulation doesn't end when the war is over.
Those messages about strength and power, they continue to permeate our culture.
Even in peacetime.
They shape our views of what it means to be a man.
We see it in advertising, movies, TV shows, even the news.
It's everywhere.
We're constantly bombarded with images and stories that reinforce a narrow definition of masculinity.
A definition that equates masculinity with success and dominance.
And this can have a real impact on men who don't fit that mold.
It can lead to feelings of inadequacy and shame.
Like they're not real men.
Exactly. Riker challenges us to question those definitions, to recognize that masculinity isn't a single thing.
It's a spectrum.
He encourages us to embrace the full diversity of what it means to be a man.
We celebrate those who express their masculinity in different ways.
Now, Riker also explores the mental and emotional toll of warfare. It's a crucial part of understanding the human cost of war.
It often gets overshadowed by the physical realities of combat.
Riker dives into the unseen wounds, the emotional and psychological scars that soldiers carry.
Long after they've left the battlefield.
He talks about the pressure to be resilient, to suppress their emotions, to fit that stoic warrior archetype.
Which makes it hard to seek help.
Exactly. They're trapped in a cycle of silence, afraid to show any weakness.
And that silence can lead to all sorts of problems down the road.
PTSD, depression, substance abuse, even suicide.
It's a tragic reality.
And Riker contrasts those old terms like shell shock with our modern understanding of PTSD.
Showing how our awareness has evolved.
But the stigma, unfortunately, still exists.
You share some pretty startling statistics. Nearly 20% of war veterans suffer from PTSD.
It underscores the urgency of addressing this issue.
It's a reminder that the wounds of war aren't always visible.
And the battle continues long after the fighting has stopped.
Riker's message is clear. We need to destigmatize mental health issues and encourage men to seek help.
Especially veterans.
It's about creating a culture where vulnerability is seen as a strength.
Absolutely.
Now, Riker also delves into the Warrior's Code.
We touched on this earlier, but he goes deeper into how it shapes masculine identity.
Especially in the context of war.
He points out that this code is all about those classic warrior virtues: loyalty, honor, courage, self-sacrifice.
The stuff of heroes.
But he also challenges us to consider the downside. What happens when men adhere too rigidly to this code?
It creates immense pressure. This expectation to always be strong and fearless.
To be willing to sacrifice everything.
It's like they're trapped
Unable to express vulnerability or seek help.
for fear of being seen as weak.
Exactly. Riker challenges us to rethink this code, to recognize the harm it can cause, and to create a more nuanced understanding of masculinity in war.
It's about recognizing that true strength lies in acknowledging our vulnerabilities.
And seeking support when we need it.
Now, Riker takes us beyond the battlefield in this next section. He looks at how traditional male roles within families are impacted by war.
It's like he's showing us the ripple effects, how war extends beyond the battlefield.
And he points out that traditionally, men have been seen as the protectors and providers, the ones who go off to war.
While the women stay home and care for the family.
It's a dynamic that's deeply ingrained in our culture.
But it can be incredibly disruptive when war enters the picture.
It tears the family unit apart.
The man is off fighting, while the woman is left to cope with the anxieties of war.
Often while raising children and managing the household alone.
And that separation can have a profound impact.
On both the man and the woman.
And the children.
Riker explores the emotional toll of this separation.
The loneliness, the isolation, the fear.
And those emotional wounds can be just as damaging as physical ones.
He also talks about the challenge of reintegration when soldiers return home.
It can be difficult to fit back into a family dynamic that's shifted.
It's like they're coming back to a world that's both familiar and foreign.
And those struggles are often compounded by the psychological wounds of war.
The PTSD, the depression, the anxiety.
It's like they're fighting a battle on two fronts.
Trying to reintegrate into their families and trying to heal from the trauma of war.
Riker emphasizes the importance of support and understanding.
For both the soldiers and their families.
We need to recognize that healing from war requires a collective effort.
And this discussion of family ties in nicely with another point Riker makes about the evolving roles of men and women.
Especially in traditionally male-dominated fields like the military.
It's like the old rules of masculinity are being rewritten.
And we're all trying to figure out what it means to be a man in this new landscape.
Riker points out that one of the biggest drivers of this change is the increasing participation of women in these fields.
More and more women are serving in the armed forces, taking on combat roles, rising to positions of leadership.
It's a powerful shift, challenging those old stereotypes about what women can do.
And it's forcing us to rethink our assumptions about masculinity.
Now, Riker acknowledges that this shift isn't without its challenges.
There's resistance from some men.
A fear that they're losing their place.
That their masculinity is being threatened.
But he encourages us to move beyond those fears, to embrace the changes that are happening, and to redefine masculinity in a way that's inclusive and empowering.
For everyone.
Right?
It's about recognizing that true strength
right.
lies not in clinging to outdated stereotypes, but in adapting to the changing world.
And finding new ways to express our masculinity.
Now, this leads to a fundamental question that Riker poses. How can men maintain their sense of masculinity in a world that's constantly changing? A world where those traditional roles are being challenged?
That's a question a lot of men are asking.
I know, I've been thinking about it a lot.
Riker argues that it's not about clinging to the past or trying to force ourselves into a mold that no longer fits.
It's about recognizing that masculinity is evolving.
Exactly. He encourages us to embrace those core values: integrity, responsibility, protectiveness, a willingness to stand up for what's right.
Those are timeless values.
They transcend any specific role or profession.
It's about being a good man.
Regardless of the circumstances.
And Riker urges us to let go of those outdated stereotypes.
The ones that limit our potential.
And prevent us from being our best selves.
It's about recognizing that true strength comes from within.
From knowing who we are and what we stand for.
Not from trying to conform to some external ideal.
Now, Riker shifts gears a bit in this section. He talks about societal expectations placed upon men.
Especially when it comes to conflict resolution and maintaining peace.
It's fascinating how this expectation, often unspoken, has shaped so much of history.
It's like there's this invisible pressure on men to be the problem solvers, the peacemakers.
The ones who step up and handle the tough situations.
And Riker argues that this expectation has its roots in biology, in our evolutionary history.
Men have often been the ones who went to war, who hunted.
Who defended their families and communities.
Those roles, those instincts, have shaped our expectations.
Of what it means to be a man.
And those expectations can be both empowering and burdensome.
They can give men a sense of purpose.
A feeling that they're making a difference.
But they can also create immense pressure.
Like they have to live up to this ideal of the strong, silent hero.
It's a difficult balance.
And Riker gives examples of how this dynamic is played out throughout history.
The successes and the
He
challenges,
talks about President Jimmy Carter,
and his role in mediating the Camp David Accords.
a prime example of masculine leadership in diplomacy.
It was a high-stakes situation, and it took someone with courage and vision to bring those two nations together.
And it wasn't just about being tough.
It was about empathy and a genuine desire for peace.
Carter showed that strength can be expressed through diplomacy and compassion.
Then there's the Paris Peace Accords, bringing an end to the Vietnam War through negotiation.
Again, showcasing the power of masculine skills to resolve conflict.
These examples illustrate the impact men have had on shaping international relations and peace negotiations.
But Riker doesn't shy away from the darker side.
The pressure that comes with these roles, the toll it takes on the men tasked with resolving conflicts,
It's like they're walking a tightrope.
trying to balance so many competing needs.
And that pressure is often compounded by societal expectations.
Men are expected to be strong and decisive, unemotional even in challenging situations.
Like they can't show weakness.
And Riker points out the potential consequences of this pressure: burnout, depression, substance abuse.
Even suicide.
It's a reminder that the human cost of conflict goes beyond the battlefield.
We need to recognize that the men who are tasked with resolving these conflicts, they deserve our support,
They deserve to be seen as human beings with their own vulnerabilities.
not just as heroes.
Now, Riker also explores the impact of economic warfare on masculinity.
It's an interesting angle.
He argues that economic warfare, with its sanctions and tariffs, places a unique set of pressures on men,
Because men are often seen as the primary breadwinners.
the ones responsible for their family's financial well-being.
And when economic hardship hits,
It can have a devastating impact on their sense of masculinity.
like they're failing as men.
Exactly. And that feeling of failure can have negative consequences.
Depression, anger, even violence.
It's a reminder that economic warfare, while often seen as less destructive than traditional warfare, can still have a profound impact
We need to recognize the human cost.
and provide support to those who are struggling.
Now this brings us back to the Warrior's Code. But Riker takes a deeper dive into its nuances and how it shapes masculine identity within espionage.
Espionage, a world of secrecy and intrigue.
It's fascinating how he connects this realm to masculinity,
Espionage has traditionally been a very male-dominated field.
and Riker explores the reasons behind that.
The qualities associated with successful spies: strength, cunning, resilience, risk-taking,
Those attributes are often associated with masculinity.
making espionage a natural fit,
It's like those masculine traits have found an outlet.
where they're not just valued, but essential,
Riker gives examples of how men have dominated this field.
especially during World War II,
The role of male spies in Britain's Secret Service,
risking their lives behind enemy lines.
gathering intelligence, disrupting operations,
They were the embodiment of the warrior archetype,
operating in the shadows.
protecting their nation from unseen threats.
It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
But Riker goes beyond the romanticized version. He points out that this connection goes beyond the physical demands.
It's also about the psychological aspects.
The mental fortitude required to operate in a world of deception,
Maintaining composure, making split-second decisions,
living a double life.
never fully revealing who you are.
It's incredibly isolating.
And that isolation takes a toll.
Riker highlights the risks of depression and substance abuse.
Even suicide.
It's a reminder that the human cost of espionage is high.
We need to do a better job of supporting these men.
Recognizing the toll their work takes and providing them with the resources they need.
It's about creating a culture that values emotional intelligence
And encouraging men to seek help.
without fear of judgment.
It's time to move beyond that stereotype of the unemotional spy and recognize the human beings behind the masks.
Now, Riker also talks about the role of men in maintaining peace, not just through military strength or espionage, but through economic influence and global leadership.
This is where his analysis gets really interesting. He argues that men have a unique responsibility to shape a more peaceful world.
Because of their historical roles and societal expectations.
Exactly. He's challenging us to use our influence and power for good.
To be peacemakers, bridge builders.
To create a world where conflict is resolved through dialogue, not violence.
It's a challenge that I think many men are ready to embrace.
Riker offers some concrete steps men can take. Get involved in your community, support organizations promoting peace, mentor young men, teach them empathy and compassion.
He also challenges us to examine our own beliefs.
to challenge those traditional notions of masculinity that often lead to conflict.
It's about recognizing that true strength lies in building others up.
Not in dominating them.
It's a powerful message.
Now, Riker also explores the complexities of relationships.
This is where things get really personal.
He dives into the challenges men face in forming healthy relationships with women.
In a world where gender roles are changing,
Many men feel lost in this new landscape.
like the old rules no longer apply.
Riker argues that the key is to embrace this change, to redefine masculinity in a way that's authentic and empowering,
He encourages men to let go of stereotypes,
and embrace qualities like empathy and communication.
which are often seen as feminine.
But he argues that they're essential for healthy relationships.
He's not saying men should become less masculine,
He's advocating for a more nuanced understanding of masculinity.
one that integrates those feminine traits alongside strength and protectiveness.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience. Riker emphasizes honesty and open communication, actively listening to our partners,
Creating a dynamic of mutual respect.
where both partners feel valued,
He also challenges the idea that men should always be in control.
that they should make all the decisions.
Those attitudes are outdated and harmful.
They lead to resentment and broken relationships,
Riker encourages a more collaborative approach.
based on partnership and shared purpose,
A healthy relationship is where both partners contribute.
and feels supported.
And this ties into his discussion of intimacy,
True intimacy requires vulnerability.
letting down our guard and sharing our true selves.
Riker challenges the idea that men should always be stoic.
It prevents us from experiencing true connection,
It's about being comfortable expressing our emotions.
allowing ourselves to be seen for who we truly are.
Riker encourages men to see vulnerability as a strength.
It takes courage to be open and authentic.
And this brings us back to the evolving nature of masculinity,
The traditional definition of masculinity.
with its emphasis on strength and stoicism.
It's no longer serving men well.
It's too narrow and limiting,
We need a new definition.
one that's more fluid and inclusive,
It's about embracing the full range of human experience
recognizing that strength can be expressed in many ways.
through vulnerability, empathy, connection,
It's about being comfortable with all of our emotions.
and allowing ourselves to be fully human.
Riker challenges us to let go of those stereotypes.
That tell us men should be emotionless and invulnerable.
It's about embracing our humanity, our flaws, our strengths,
It's about creating a world where men can be their authentic selves.
without the pressure to conform.
A world where men can be strong and sensitive, ambitious and caring.
Successful and supportive,
It's a vision that I think many men are ready for,
a new definition of masculinity.
based on peace, justice, and equality. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into steel masculinity. We've been exploring how historical roles, war, and even technology have shaped our understanding of what it means to be a man.
And in this last part, Riker turns his attention to relationships.
It feels like we're in uncharted territory these days. The old rules of dating and relationships don't seem to apply anymore.
Riker acknowledges that a lot of men feel lost, like the script has been flipped.
So how can men find fulfilling connections while staying true to themselves?
He argues that we need to embrace this change, to redefine masculinity in a way that's both authentic and empowering.
He encourages men to let go of those outdated stereotypes and embrace qualities like empathy and communication.
Qualities that are often seen as feminine.
But he says they're essential for building healthy relationships.
It's not about becoming less masculine, it's about expanding our understanding of what masculinity can be.
Integrating those feminine traits alongside strength and resilience.
Exactly.
It's like he's saying that true strength comes from embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
He emphasizes the importance of honesty and open communication,
Being able to express our feelings and actively listening to our partners.
creating that space for mutual respect and understanding.
He also challenges the idea that men should always be in control.
Making all the decisions, wearing the pants in the relationship.
Those attitudes are so outdated.
They create imbalance and resentment.
Riker advocates for a more collaborative approach,
A true partnership.
where both individuals contribute and feel supported.
And this leads into his discussion of intimacy. Riker argues that true intimacy requires vulnerability.
It takes courage to let down our guard and share our true selves with someone else.
He challenges the idea that men should always be stoic and unemotional.
Those beliefs can actually prevent us from experiencing true connection.
It's about being comfortable expressing our emotions,
allowing ourselves to be seen.
even with our flaws.
Riker encourages men to embrace vulnerability as a strength,
It takes real strength to be open and authentic.
especially in a world that often tells us to hide our emotions.
This shift in perspective connects directly to Riker's main argument, the evolving nature of masculinity in the modern world,
The traditional definition of masculinity
with its emphasis on strength and stoicism.
is not working anymore.
It's too rigid and limiting.
We need a new definition
One that's more fluid and inclusive.
that embraces the full range of human qualities.
Riker isn't saying we should abandon traditional values. He's saying we need to expand them.
To recognize that strength can also be expressed through vulnerability and empathy.
It's about being comfortable with all of our emotions, embracing both the masculine and the feminine.
Allowing ourselves to be fully human.
It's about creating a world where men feel free to be themselves.
Without the pressure of conforming to some outdated ideal.
It's about recognizing that true strength comes from within.
It's been quite a journey exploring steel masculinity. Riker's insights really challenge us to rethink our assumptions, to embrace change, and to create a world where men can thrive.
If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the book for yourself.
You can find Steel Masculinity on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the evolving nature of masculinity in the 21st century.